Coming up on our newscast tonight. The two Koreas hold working-level talks to iron out various details regarding the upcoming historic Third Inter-Korean Summit. Travel routes, size of delegation, and live broadcast perimeters are most likely the topics discussed at the talks. The government proposes another supplementary budget bill. The funds will be used to help reduce youth unemployment rate through a number of ways, including supporting SMEs. South Korea celebrates Arbor Day the same way it has been doing for decades, and it seems like continually adjusting its tree planting efforts over the years has ensured successful reforestation results. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, time for Arirang News Center. Thanks for joining us. I'm Daniel Choi, coming to you live from Seoul. South and North Korea have begun the actual preparation work to set up a historic summit at the end of this month. Today, working-level officials from both sides met to negotiate the details on protocol, security, and media coverage on Summit Day. Our Chief Cheong Wa Dae correspondent Moon Gun-young joins us live from the top office. Gun-young?
Well, Daniel, so the South Korean delegation who traveled to the border village of Panmunjom for their first working-level preparatory talks to set up a summit later this month between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un returned to the Blue House just a few hours ago. Like you said, the meeting today was to discuss the security protocol and the news coverage, media coverage on April 27th, the summit day. Now, the South Korean delegation, however, said that they had little to share with the media as today's talks included sensitive issues such as the leaders' protocol security, which until the details have been negotiated, agreed upon, and the final decision is made, they cannot release. Well, what we know thus far, however, is that the meeting kicked off at 10 a.m. Korea time on the South Korean border village, on the South Korean side of the border village. It lasted for 4 straight hours without lunch break, and the delegation said the two sides held a thorough and serious negotiations. Now, looking at the 5-member delegation from the South, led by Kim Sang-gyun, he's the Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Service. It comprised the Presidential Secretary for Protocol, Deputy Chief for Presidential Security Service, Director of the Presidential Press Center, and Yoon Gun-young. He's the Director of the Blue House Situation Room. Now, Yoon is known to be one of the closest confidants of President Moon. He traveled to North Korea last month as part of the South presidential delegation, and again earlier this week with the South Art Troops and Taekwondo demonstration team. Now, looking on the other side, North Korea's delegation, it was led by Kim Chang-son. He's known to be North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's chief aide, responsible for scheduling itineraries, protocol, and the flow of reports, policy documents, and communications to and from the regime's supreme leader himself. He traveled to the South with Kim Jong-un's sister earlier when she traveled to visit President Moon as Kim's special envoy. Now, the fact that this man was on site today at the talks and the 5 others at the talks today, experts say reflects the North Korean leader is serious about this April 27th summit and is determined to make it happen and make it work for that matter. We also expect the two sides to have discussed the detailed schedule for the summit day, including whether there'll be a luncheon and a banquet between the two leaders. Daniel.
The hours probably feel like minutes or seconds to both sides for preparing for the big talks. I understand another one could be scheduled. If so, did they decide on a date, Gun-young?
Right. Well, yes and no, Daniel. South Korean delegation said it will take more than one meeting to negotiate and iron out the details for these talks in terms of security protocol and news coverage. Now, they still need to figure out how the North Korean leader will arrive at the venue, which is on the southern side, on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom, whether he would cross the military demarcation line that bisects the two Koreas by foot, which will be highly symbolic. Now, they also need to determine how and how many times the two leaders would meet on that day, and whether parts of their meeting would be broadcast on live television. However, the South Korean delegation declined to answer how many more times they expect to meet with their North Korean counterparts before everything is settled. They only added that two sides agreed to meet for the second time, but no specific date has been agreed upon just yet. Daniel.
All right, a lot of undetermined facts in the pipelines right now. Thank you for those updates. We appreciate it, Kanyong. Now, the JCS chairs of Seoul and Washington held a phone conversation recently. The two sides reaffirmed their alliance and vowed close coordination on various security matters. Park Geun-hye shares with us what the generals discussed.
The chair of the Republic of Korea Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Chung Kyung-do, spoke with his U.S. counterpart, General Joseph Dunford Jr., earlier this week to discuss security issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula and reaffirm their willingness to maintain strong cooperation. According to the official website of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the two leaders also reiterated their commitment to continuing close consultation and coordination on mutual security issues, vowing to work together to further strengthen the ironclad alliance between the two countries. According to South Korea's military officials Thursday, the phone call was held on Tuesday evening at around 8 p.m. Korea time and lasted for about 30 minutes. General Chung also asked his U.S. counterpart to provide both intelligence and operation support for South Korea's anti-piracy Cheong-hae unit and the South Korean Navy's 4,400-ton destroyer Munmu the Great, which is on its way to West Africa, where 3 South Korean nationals have been abducted by pirates in waters off the coast of Ghana on March 26. General Dunford reportedly promised the U.S. forces utmost support regarding the matter. The two chairs also agreed to closely cooperate to particularly maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula ahead of a historic third inter-Korean summit talks at the end of this month and a possible Pyongyang-Washington summit next month. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The Moon Jae-in administration proposed a multi-billion-dollar supplementary budget to reduce the nation's stubbornly high youth unemployment rate. Kim Hye-sung explains how this latest measure could prove to be effective.
The government has proposed a supplementary budget worth about $3.7 billion, which will be submitted to the National Assembly Friday for approval. The extra spending is aimed at tackling South Korea's high youth unemployment, which the government sees as a developing crisis, and at helping regional economies hit by corporate restructuring. The government's goal is to bring youth unemployment down to below 8% by 2021 from last year's 9.8% and to create around 50,000 jobs for young people. Of the total extra budget, $2.75 billion are to be used to support small and mid-sized companies that hire new full-time employees and to subsidize their wages. There are also tax incentives for new workers and for smaller-sized firms that hire them. The Finance Ministry said the remaining $950 million will go to domestic automobile and shipbuilding companies in the restructuring process. If passed, this would be the second extra budget under President Moon Jae-in. Last year, the Moon administration formed a $10.5 billion supplementary budget to create more quality jobs. South Korea has passed extra budgets every year since 2015. The latest proposal, worth $3.7 billion, would be the smallest one since 2006. But there is no guarantee this one will pass the National Assembly. Opposition lawmakers are against it, and the ruling Democratic Party holds just 41% of the body's 293 seats. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
The Korean government has designated Gunsan as an industrial crisis response zone, extending a helping hand to the struggling area, a decision made after American automaker General Motors announced plans to shut down its plant in the southeastern city by May, dealing another blow to the residents already suffering after a shipyard was closed last July. The designation will enable workers and firms in the area to receive financial support, while those who lost their jobs will be eligible for job training and subsidies. Companies that open new businesses in Gunsan will receive tax exemptions and enjoy other incentives. It's the first time a city has been designated an industrial crisis response zone since the category was created last June. The intensifying trade spat between Washington and Beijing has countries around the world on the edge of their seats. Many are fearful of the repercussions if the tit-for-tat between the two economic superpowers escalates into a full-blown trade war. Cha Sang-mi gauges the potential impact of such a scenario on the Korean economy.
The first volley came a month ago on March 9th when President Trump imposed steep tariffs of 25% on Chinese steel and 10% on aluminum. On March 22nd, Trump signed an executive memorandum proposing $60 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs against China for its alleged theft of American intellectual property. In the first week of April, Beijing hit back, imposing 25% duties on 8 American goods, including pork and recycled aluminum, tariffs in total worth $3 billion. Just a day later, Trump unveiled a list of 1,300 Chinese goods that would be subject to 25% tariffs focused on the Chinese aerospace, tech, and medical industries. And the next day, Beijing responded with an equal 25% tariff on 106 categories of American goods, including soybeans, cars, and chemicals, worth $50 billion. In the meantime, South Korea is worried about getting caught in the crossfire. The Korea International Trade Association estimates that if the trade war expands to include the European Union, global trade volume could fall by 6%. That could mean a drop in exports for Korea of 6.4%, a loss of nearly $370 billion. On the China side, Korea's exports already face a decline.
Mainly because a lot of what Korea sells to China, its largest trading partner, is actually intermediate parts that are used for products for use in China and also for Chinese exports to other countries, including the United States.
According to Kita, Korea's shipments of intermediate goods account for over 70% of all its exports to China.
There will be direct damage done to Korean companies based in China, as well as indirect damage to Korean businesses that export to the US through China.
While experts say the Korean government should keep its options open and look to other countries for its exports, the hope is that tensions ease and that things don't escalate to a point that hurts global economic growth. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motor and 2 other divisions of the conglomerate are seeing their shares soar. This comes after a U.S. hedge fund revealed it holds more than $1 billion of the company's stocks and urged rapid reform of the auto giant's governance. Kim Mo-kyun has the full story.
Korea's largest automaker Hyundai Motor Group is facing a fresh challenge. A unit of the U.S. investment firm Elliott Management announced on Wednesday that it has stakes in Hyundai Motor, Kia Motors, and Hyundai Mobis worth more than $1 billion and is demanding the Korean auto group reform its corporate governance structure and improve capital returns. The $1 billion stake amounts to less than 1.5% of combined market capitalization of the 3 affiliates. The remarks follow Hyundai Motor Group's announcement last week that it would simplify its governance structure by merging its logistics unit Hyundai Glovis with Hyundai Mobis and making the latter the de facto holding company of the auto and steel empire. The change is expected to eventually simplify the conglomerate's cross-shareholding structure. The Hong Kong-based affiliate of American hedge fund Elliott Management applauded Hyundai's decision, but said that more needs to be done to benefit the companies and stakeholders, adding that it plans to further engage with management and stakeholders. Following the news, shares in 3 Hyundai divisions jumped. As of Thursday, shares of Hyundai Motor rose 1.3% from Tuesday's close. Kia Motors and Hyundai Mobis also climbed 1.9% and 2.7% respectively. Much attention was focused on the latest announcement as Elliott Management has been a critic of large conglomerates in the past. It filed a series of lawsuits to stop the merger of Samsung C&T and Cheil Industries in 2005. It also proposed that Samsung Electronics simplify its operations and increase shareholder returns in 2016, which led to the electronics giant taking corresponding measures in line with the proposal. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Korea's tourism deficit was at its lowest level since September thanks to the PyeongChang Olympics effect. According to the Bank of Korea, the nation's numbers in February stood at some $1.4 billion, with the Winter Games held during that month. Over 20% on-year spike in the number of tourists from the U.S. and Europe was recorded. Service account deficit in February also shrank to some $2.6 billion from around 4.5 billion the previous month. The current account, which combines the service and goods accounts, logged a surplus of over $4 billion in February, its 72nd straight month in surplus. The sentencing of Park Geun-hye will take place Friday. The court is preparing for an historic live broadcast of a trial. But the first ever democratically elected South Korean president to be impeached is unlikely to be in attendance. For details, we turn to our Won Jung-hwan.
Faced with 18 charges including bribery, abuse of power, and leaking state secrets, 3 decades in prison may mean that Park, who is 66 years old, spends the rest of her life behind bars. In February, South Korean prosecutors demanded former President Park Geun-hye serve 30 years in jail for her role in the massive corruption scandal that led to her impeachment and fall from grace. Park's sentencing trial by the lower court will take place Friday afternoon, and for the first time in South Korea's history, the sentencing of a former president will be broadcast live. The live broadcast has become possible after the Supreme Court amended the rules last year to allow the live broadcast in certain circumstances and if the hearing is of public interest.
In the past, Choi Sun-sil and Lee Jae-in refused the live broadcast, and the court accepted it because they thought individual loss would be much greater than the public gain. But in the case of former President Park Geun-hye, the decision to broadcast the trial live has become possible due to her public status as the country's former president and overall public interest.
But according to the professor, the impeached former president is unlikely to attend her trial, as she has been boycotting court proceedings since last October.
Park has been continuously questioning the fairness of the trial and has expressed she is against the live broadcasting of the entire hearing. Considering all of these things together, I don't think the former president will attend tomorrow's trial.
Park Geun-hye was removed from office last year on the back of a massive influence peddling scandal. She is accused of accepting bribes in exchange for political favors for a number of the country's biggest conglomerates, such as SK, Samsung, and Lotte. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
Aside from Park Geun-hye, another ex-president, Lee Myung-bak, is in the spotlight over corruption charges. They aren't the only former leaders to see their reputations tarnished after stepping out of the top office. Shin Se-min examines why there are so many recurring instances of top political figures being mired in scandal and disgrace, and if we are reaching a turning point.
2 winters have passed since South Korea showed the world the power of democracy. And finally, on Friday afternoon, the sentencing of the ex-president, brought down by the candlelight protests, will be beamed live around the nation. But former President Park Geun-hye isn't the only ex-Korean leader embroiled in corruption and other crimes. In fact, there's a long list of wrongdoers. The arrest of South Korea's 17th president, Lee Myung-bak, who is now detained here in Seoul Eastern Detention Center, adds to the long list of former leaders whose reputations were tarnished towards the end of their tenure or post-presidency. And they all have something in common. They were all mired in corruption scandal, including themselves, their relatives, or close aides. While it's a shame Korea has been lumbered with so many corrupt leaders, political analysts say the legal strife facing the nation's 2 most recent ex-leaders shows Korea is moving in the right direction.
What we're seeing with 2 of our corrupt former presidents may be a turning point for South Korea's democracy and constitutionalism. It also shows the country now has the maturity to deal with such abuses of power.
Korea's recent history is blighted with scandal-ridden former leaders. Ex-presidents Chun Do-hwan and No Tae-woo, both former army generals, were found guilty of mutiny and corruption and spent time behind bars. Kim Young-sam and Kim Dae-jung also saw their legacies tarnished by corruption. Not directly, but their sons were convicted for receiving kickbacks. Another former president, Do Mo-hyun, was investigated for alleged corruption involving his family members. He later committed suicide, and the case was dropped. And the thread that runs through all these cases: dirty money. Experts say Korea's rapid economic development, with its cozy links between the government and big businesses, meant it was always more likely former leaders and their families would fill their pockets through dubious practices.
It facilitated and expedited the development, but the downside of it is that it became a fertile ground for corruption and slush funds and so on and so forth. And because of the presidency that we have, of course, it's the subject of the constitutional amendment. President has a concentrated power. We call it imperial presidency.
And that, he and others say, shows the necessity of revising the Constitution. President Moon Jae-in is currently attempting to push through a government-drafted bill on constitutional changes that include weakening the powers of his office. South Korea is a vibrant democracy, but its executive-style presidency allows the country's leader to wield an extreme amount of power, giving rise to winner-takes-all politics, which critics say enables corruption while reducing representation for opposition voices. And those who back President Moon's plan say the decentralization of power will lay the path for a healthier democracy. There's also hope the new constitutional system, if accepted by the Korean people, will lessen the chance of future presidents making the disgraced exits so commonly seen in the past. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now. To celebrate Arbor Day, a tree planting ceremony was held on the grounds of the nation's top office. President Moon Jae-in and his aides planted a pine tree right next to the Yeomin-gwan building, where his senior secretaries work and is also his own primary workplace. The president's office used to be in the main Cheong Wa Dae building, but was moved when Moon took office to improve work efficiency, openness, and communication with his staff. The planting continued at the Liberal leader's official residence, where he also planted a white forsythia, or misonnamu, a shrub native to Korea that is endangered in the wild. Even if it's no longer a day marked in red in Korean calendar, the significance of Arbor Day is not overlooked. People still get out to plant trees to mark this special occasion. There's extra motivation to boost the proportion of green space in the country today to get some relief from the fine dust blanketing the nation. Lee Jung-hyun sheds light on how the decades-old tradition contributed to reforestation efforts.
April 5th marks Arbor Day, or Sikmogil, here in Korea. Although the day stopped being a public holiday in 2005, various groups in government offices, schools, and workplaces are still carrying on with the tradition of tree planting every year. More than 100 people have gathered to plant 5,000 pine trees for Arbor Day. Although this practice can still be seen in South Korea, with each year that passes, this sight is becoming increasingly harder to come by. Over the past decade, the number of trees planted in Gyeonggi-do province decreased by around 20% to 2.5 million trees last year, while the area decreased by around 16%. However, experts say the decrease isn't necessarily a negative sign.
Korea is considered a pretty successful case of reforestation. It's just less common to plant trees than before because we have less land to fill up.
What's also changed over the years is the types of trees planted. The most popular choice for reforestation purposes has been the pine tree, but that has changed due to various reasons, such as the spread of pests that thrives off pine wood. Instead, another type of evergreen tree, the nakyeopsong tree, and broadleaf trees such as tulip trees are planted more often these days. The Korea Forest Service has said that in the few months before and after Arbor Day, they plan to plant around 54 million trees over 22,000 hectares of land across the nation. An official from the organization said that ultimately by 2022, the agency aims to expand the proportion of nature per square meter in major cities from around 10 square meters as it is now to around 12 square meters in order to minimize the negative impact of fine dust pollution. Lee Jung-hyun, Arirang News, Wonju.
It's time to turn to Michelle back at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, it's been raining all day long here in Korea. It's great to improve air conditions, but will we see the sun anytime soon?
Well, Daniel, at least until tomorrow morning, we are going to have more rain. Now, the skies will clear past noon, with Seoul expected to receive some more precipitation, while the rest of the regions surrounding our nation stays under clear skies. Unfortunately, we will endure some more wet conditions until tomorrow morning, with Seoul expected to receive at least 5 to 10 millimeters of rain. But as soon as the rain clears in the morning, smog is expected to flow and making us wear our masks once more. In the morning, Seoul will be a tad chilly, hitting up to 7 degrees Celsius for Seoul, Daegu, and Gyeongju, both beginning the day at 10 degrees, while Busan hitting at 13 degrees. The highs remain on the chilly side tomorrow as well, Seoul topping out to 11 degrees, Gwangju and Busan topping out to 13 and 16 degrees as well. After the rain, we will experience one last cold spell. They are expected to drop about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, but afterwards, conditions will return to the seasonal averages. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we could pack into this evening's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for watching. Good day or good night, depending on your time zone.